So our last guest almost kind of needs no introduction, but brings a wealth of experience to marketplace and network effect driven businesses from his sort of first days as one of the board members and senior executives at PayPal, which then became part of eBay, through to more recent investments in Airbnb, and I guess your latest is Convoy. What I want to do is give the folks in the audience the chance to ask you lots of questions too, but maybe before we dive into that, just to kick off, tell us about how you sort of first encountered marketplace businesses online, and why you fell in love with them.
So I was very early at PayPal. My friend Peter and I were taking walks, and I was describing to him my experience having founded a company a little over a year earlier called SocialNet, and the fact that my experience was basically every Friday there were things I wish I had known Monday, and would have changed the week. And so when he and his friend Max Levchin decided to co-found a company that was first called FieldLink, then called Confinity, then called PayPal, he and Max decided they would put each one of their closest friends on the board. So I was Peter's and Scott Bannister was Max's. And that went through a whole iteration. It started with encryption on mobile phones, encryption on cache on mobile phones, takes too long, cache on Palm Pilots, a little isolated and not enough use case. Oh, we'll do sync to email. Oh, we'll do email payments. And that's how PayPal all came about. And there's a more detailed story about that. It is funny how many people I hear claim, so-and-so invented the idea of PayPal. It was Max Levchin in a board meeting, just to be clear. And so then, one of the funny things to watching PayPal as an organization is when it launched, it actually had no real knowledge about eBay, right? There was no discussion about eBay in the board meeting, anything up to the launch. The first week was, there's all these eBay people using it. Do you think we should get them off the system? And then Luke Nozick, who was one of the junior co-founders at PayPal, said, no, these are our customers. Right? And it was a complete pivot to eBay. And we started paying a lot of attention to marketplaces. And marketplaces have some of the most natural network effects, but are super difficult to create. Difficult to get critical mass, difficult to get the flywheel working in a way that it can work essentially organically. And one of the things that I was responsible for, as soon as we realized eBay was the key thing, basically Peter tasked me with all things eBay. And it ranged everything from negotiating with them because they owned a company called BillPoint, which was essentially
their attempt to kill you.
Their attempt to kill us, and they bought BillPoint even before we'd launched, right? So it was like we were going into the home field, so negotiating with them. Two, one of the plans that we had in the backdrop that only a few people knew about, which was codenamed Dark Star, after the Death Star, which is if we had to launch a competitive marketplace, because if eBay banned us entirely from the system, that the best thing to do for our business would actually be to launch a marketplace and try to compete, since we had a whole bunch of eBay's customers, both buyers and sellers. Yeah. So you try to move them over in what is essentially, like Luke Skywalker going into the trench and going, well, we got one shot at this, let's see if it works. Fortunately, we didn't need to do that. And the whole dynamic of reputation systems, buyer and seller, growth and demand, how you manage them, what does quality product look like, what is the integration of payments, how much is it end-to-end, all of those things were things that we all learned collectively. And you can go, each of those subjects you can spend a half an hour on.
And I guess having seen eBay up close, and it really was the first kind of successful quintessential marketplace on the internet, why has that company, I don't know if floundered is too strong a word, because it's a sort of a $20-25 billion outcome, and there's a lot of alumni in the room. But you know, there are bigger marketplaces out there that it failed to become. You know, including Amazon, frankly. They had the liquidity. They vertical by vertical were able to move from collectibles into all sorts of other things, and you know, what went wrong there from your vantage point?
Well, at least a couple of fundamental things, and there may be even more. So one is, to some degree, back when PayPal was launching on eBay and got purchased by eBay, the general wisdom of the valley was that eBay was a much better model than Amazon, and that eBay would dominate Amazon. And you know, the attributes were we don't have inventory, we have a whole bunch of small seller developers building everything, and all of those things are true. And I think I think there are probably two macro strategic issues. So one was they tried to build to their weaknesses versus playing to their strengths. So they went, okay, what does Amazon have that we don't have? You know, like logistics control, tracking, new object inventory, you know, So let's try to go build all that in eBay. And yet the thing is if you're buying on, this is a little bit like the last point, if you're buying on, I'd like the book to arrive, a new book to arrive in a day or two, it's very difficult to compete with Amazon on that, right? And you're going to try to build up eBay as much as possible to do that, but at the end of the day, we have all the shipping arrangements, we have logistics, we have the warehouses, we'll ship you the book in a day or two, you know, arrive in a day or two, and it's done. And so they never got any traction on any of that. And roughly speaking, they should have played to their strengths, even if maybe you'd say, look, without the new products and everything else, and without the pristine end-to-end experience, maybe there'll be a limit to how much growth, but you're just never going to build that in. And so you should have said, lots of small, like almost like think of it, the sellers as developers, developers of apps, and so like each of them have them develop the most unique possible things and be the purveyor of those experiences would have been a better alternative in the strategy. The second part of it, and it's related, is they didn't evolve the product, right? I mean, the big jump that finally they got around to that Donahoe did that was smart was say, okay, look, it's a mobile universe. Let's simply move it over to mobile. That's important. But like, what is the product experience for buyers and sellers? What does the platform look like? And it's still basically very, very similar to today to when we sold PayPal to eBay. And ultimately, to really make headway to new markets, other kinds of things, you actually ultimately have to make jumps in the product. And those are the two areas I think they have done suboptimally.
And if we fast forward, I guess, a decade to Airbnb, which you know you were one of the very first to spot and invest in. What was it about that model that drew parallels or pattern recognition with what you'd seen up close with eBay?
Well, there's a long stack, but roughly speaking, what I look for in this range, one, could be a huge market, obviously, eBay for space. Two is great founders. Three is that one of the real valuable hacks in early marketplaces that if you see them is, and it has any energy to it, is very valuable, is when sellers can be buyers and buyers sellers. So you get this flywheel going very early. And a lot of the folks who are interested in the kind of I'll stay on Simon's couch or in spare room and so forth and so on. Whereas I will rent it out and I will also do it, and it becomes a flywheel. So you can get to liquidity, your earlier thing. There are maybe some metrics for defining liquidity. You don't have to go back to the old judge, although it's a funny line. And those kinds of measures you can see, and then and a quick survey of how people were, as per the gentleman up before me, you look at a market definition. People weren't really focusing on that particular flywheel of bringing up essentially a variety of with a complete marketplace for all this kind of inventory, but a key sections of new inventory that would create a lot of liquidity, and this kind of buyers and sellers being their own. It isn't just like a catalog you're shopping, but actually kind of an active community. And the kinds of things that I saw in the founders that I thought was really useful. This was from later. This wasn't from the first meeting. Brian, Nate, and Joe have the privilege of probably being the entrepreneurs that I have most quickly interrupted and told them that I would make them an offer, it was about 2 minutes into their pitch. I had reference checked them beforehand, and lucky me. And so, since I'd known that and seen that, I was already really interested. But like, for example, the kind of things that I've learned from, in this case, Joe and Brian, was they have this concept of 7-star design, which is essentially, you're not just designing the web experience, the mobile experience, what does my shopping experience look like, what does my communication experience look like, but the experience of the stay. And so, for example, they did some really thorough design things, and one of the things they realized was a very common pattern, and maybe you guys, all as marketplace people, all know this, I'm sorry if I'm repeating something you know, but this was instructive to me when I learned it, was that customers come into the rental, and the very first thing they do is look out the window. And if the window's dirty, they conclude the whole place is dirty. So what they did is they, as part of the instruction, and you think about developers as, the hosts as developers, is giving them, kind of tips and instructions. And part of the thing is, oh, by the way, you get much higher ratings, you get much higher average selling prices if you wash the windows. Right.
We had someone here earlier who said you don't even need a window, so that's...
No, the window is useful in this case. Yeah, perhaps. And then, there's a whole stack of different things from the Airbnb experiences, but it was kind of the question of, we're going after this flywheel, and how do you make the flywheel work? And part of what I do when I'm talking to entrepreneurs is I push them on their beliefs, because what you want is a combination of persistence and flexibility. Persistence from the viewpoint of, I've thought it through, I have a vision, I have a reason for what I'm doing, but flexibility in that, if you're at least asking smart questions, like, okay, let me think about that and let me integrate that into my plan. And that is the usual successful learning curve that you need to have in order to do it, and all three of them are intensely that way.
And I guess one of the things we've covered today, and in some detail, and we've covered it from the point of view of supply, of demand, of different KPIs to measure, and how best to scale, is just how sort of hard and sometimes nuanced marketplace businesses can be to build and to get that flywheel working. So based on your vantage point, why is it the case that they are so rare?
So the key challenge is that essentially both sides, but especially buyers, no one's looking for a marketplace. Right? That's an abstraction. No one goes, I'm looking for a marketplace in X as a customer. That's not what they're doing. And so they have a need that is then very difficult to track. And this is, of course, one of the reasons why what is your strategy vis-a-vis Google, right? Whether or not you do paid acquisition, and is that cocaine, and all the rest, and how does that work? And there's a lot of different strategies there. But getting that going is super difficult. And frequently, your classic challenge is, you get the supply, you have no buyers, maybe the supply goes away, can you get the supply in a persistent way, then you have enough buyers. Like, all marketplaces are this constant kind of ratchet between demand and supply, and they're all basically demand driven, right, at the end of the day. But if you get a whole bunch of demand and you don't have the right supply, then you've just purchased or acquired a whole bunch of demand, and the demand is, oh, I went and looked there, that's not very good, right? And so it's savable, but that two sides of the thing done, not just, oh, we have two different audiences we're trying to bring together, but we're trying to bring them together coterminous at the time of interest in the transaction, in something that's somewhat non-standard, because that's one of the reasons almost all marketplaces work on trust systems, because it's like, for example, like all good venture bets, most high-quality venture capitalists have learned that mixed votes in the partnership are actually the things that generate the highest returns.
So Airbnb was a contentious one?
Airbnb was a contentious one. One of my partners, who throws himself under the bus, but I won't mention him by name, basically looked across the table at me and said, look, everyone has to have a deal that fails. You can have this one. And he's a good friend of mine, so it was fun. And the reason is because like, oh my God, you think people at scale are going to go stay at someone's house? Like, what's going to happen? There's going to be like assaults and theft and da 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 da.
Which there has been, they've weathered it.
Yes, and so those kinds of trust issues are prevalent because like, who am I transacting with, etc. And so you have to solve all of these problems, and you have to get to critical mass, and then you have to get the flywheel going, and it's tricky.
And how does this device change that? Is that a game changer or an accelerator for certain kinds of marketplaces, do you think?
I think it is. I think it's one of the reasons why, like what you guys are doing today, we also do a marketplace conference, Great Market. We think marketplaces are really interesting. One of our partners that's friends with, you three, Simon, who basically only isn't here today because he's actually bringing another deal to the partnership today, maybe in a couple hours, precisely in timing, and so we think it's hugely valuable. And part of it, of course, is because there's all kinds of things that the mobile phone ends in. It makes the density of the connectivity of the online world to now much more. So people can bring in new kinds of verticals and so forth. They can be demand right now, like I have interest in it and I'm going to look at it. It can increment trust, right? The pictures of people, the ability to connect, right? So, part of what happens is, say, for example, you're transacting in high value goods. The fact you could call and talk to someone about it, that's a trust incrementer, right? So all of those things are enabled by these devices, which is one of the reasons, exactly, like you guys, we're like, oh, this is an interesting area and an area we pay a lot of attention to.
So I want to be sort of generous to the audience. What questions are there from the floor? And it could cover anything from some of the things we've talked about to sort of more general questions about Reid's experience at LinkedIn or as an early Facebook investor or his more recent initiatives in AI. I know there was Tim.
So what are the best concepts of building trust in marketplaces that you've seen and that you would recommend?
Well, so look, this is probably old hat to all of you guys, but basically, what are the obvious, very simple questions that people ask? Like, is this a real person? Are they verified identities? But by the way, even low-cost verifications can be like the picture of the person and so forth. Guarantees, right? So part of how Airbnb went on a turn the whole company alert when they had their first major event.
It was the trashing of
basically a criminal had stolen a credit card, used it to stay at a Airbnb place, and just completely like vandalized the place. It wasn't even just stealing things. It was just So it was like the whole company went to it. We're on a trust and safety march. Everyone's working on trust and safety. And so the kinds of things that they generated is, okay, well, what kinds of guarantees can we give to hosts and to travelers? Because they go, okay, well, there's a company that has a bunch of money that's standing behind a guarantee, and I'm guaranteed this way, and those kind of guarantees increment trust. Now, that doesn't guarantee trust because people go, well, I know you're giving me the guarantee, but is it still okay? Right? All of those kinds of things are kind of the standard sets of techniques, but they're important to do. And then when you look at a specific marketplace, you think about, okay, from my marketplace, from my buyers, from my sellers, for example, what does verification look like there? What does a reputation system look like there? What does a guarantee look like there? I'll tell you actually a funny PayPal story on this, which is an example of what not to do that I had to unroll. So we were fighting this trust and safety battle between PayPal and BillPoint on eBay. And so the then head of product, David Sachs, rolled out the buyer protection guarantee, which was a $5,000 guarantee on a good. But having given no thought to the shape of this guarantee, it was basically if you didn't get the good, you were paid back the money. So what happened is these fraudsters essentially collaborated.
It's like an agency problem.
It was an agency problem. And so, but because of the way the thing was written, you actually had to pay them out. So we were paying out money at a rate that was catastrophic. And Peter called me and said, I'm shutting it down tomorrow. And I said, well, give me 2 days, right, to figure this out. Like, we have enough money for 2 days of losses, right? He's like, yes. And so what we did as a patch is we shifted it to the eBay double guarantee, which is eBay had a way of doing insurance, and we said if you use PayPal, you get 2x the eBay guarantee. So we basically piggyback off their system, right? They had to make the decision.
So they were like the first deductible, and you were the extra.
Yes, exactly.
The reinsurance.
And so the marketing was not that bad because it was like, okay, we're shifting the buyer protection guarantee to the eBay double guarantee. That doesn't sound bad, right? As a way of doing it, but that at least gave us the lateral out of, oh my God, we're about to crush the company on this badly designed guarantee to something that actually in fact worked. So.
Raj.
I have a question.
Oh, hey man.
Hey. People are so important, as you know, and you, I think, have seen probably the most successful founders of more than anyone. So your pattern recognition of people is incomparable. And so the question is, how much can you really see it in that first meeting? Versus does it more feel like, well, 3 designers that did Airbnb, would you really have called it if they didn't have those metrics of success?
Great question. Actually, in fact, look, I'm obviously Mr. Network guy on various levels. I wouldn't have made that offer if I hadn't reference checked them before they came in. So I'd done a reference check. And my own view is that actually, in fact, if I had to pick between an interview or a pitch or a reference check, I'd take the reference check. Especially if I can get to several different people that I trust that have depth of knowledge. Because everything is, like, there are people who can pitch really, really well and execute not so well, right? And they seem really great and smart and all the rest. And so the references is much better. Now, both is even better than one or the other. And so I'd already had called 5 people who'd worked with them beforehand because it had happened that it was easy to do. I don't always do that. Before meeting would have happened, it was easy to do, so I did that.
Was that the case with Zuckerberg too? Because that you met a little earlier.
Yes. I actually hadn't had any references. The way the Zuckerberg thing happened is Sean Parker had discovered them because he rented a room in the house that they were in. Sean, who I'd helped with Plaxo, called me and said, oh my God, the Facebook's great. And I said, yeah, they're based in Boston. He's like, no, they're here. Because I'd tracked them already from their traffic. Like I would have, their traffic, look, when they launched a new college at the point where they were pitching, in 6 weeks, they went to, from 0 people using a campus to 85% checking in 6+ times a day, right? And you look at that kind of traffic curve and you're like, I don't care if you can't speak. It doesn't make a difference. Right. So, look, there wasn't a really reference check, but you knew you were going to take the bet anyway. And then, because I'd gotten, as you know, had gotten grief from having led the round in Friendster, and you're like, oh, you're having your cake and eating it too, you should do LinkedIn and Friendster. I actually had Peter lead the round and I followed. Because that way it was like, look, I'm not actually, in fact, going into these areas in conflict, even though I didn't think at the time they're in conflict, and even now I don't think they're in conflict.
So one was people and the other was metrics, is the answer.
Yes. Well, people, metrics if you have them, people, project, market. That's essentially the you do an integration, but you know all this.
Please.
What would be your best advice to increase platform loyalty? Or to put it negatively, some marketplaces are open to leakage, disintermediation.
Yeah.
Do you believe in these marketplaces? Or?
Well, all marketplaces have something of a gray market effect. And from an early stage perspective, if the raw demand of the value of your marketplace bringing buyers and sellers isn't so strong that you could ignore the gray market, you don't have a strong enough marketplace yet. So in early stages, I don't worry about leakage from the viewpoint if there isn't a raw enough intrinsic desire. Now, Airbnb, for example, even from when I invested in it, it was like, oh, I'm going to contact Simon about staying at his place, and I'll say, hey, but maybe we can arrange it on the side, right? Not to pay the fee.
Yeah, and there was like emails and phone numbers. They had to put algorithms in to not allow you to put that into.
But ultimately, even though there was and is that bleed, and now there's large enough that they're working on it some, not just from a positive incentive, but a negative incentive point of view, there's enough people who are like, look, I'm comfortable with the reputation system I have here. Enough people who are like, look, this is valuable to me and I'm honorable, that you could do nothing about the gray market in Airbnb and still have a perfectly good trajectory on the business and all the rest. Now that being said, you want to modify it, and you want to use a combination of positive and negative incentives. Like positive incentives are things that lead to my better business. Higher reputation score leads to higher conversion, leads to higher ASPs. I only get the reputation if I do it. All of those kinds of things that you lock in that should be more intrinsic to the value that I'm getting from the system. Frequently, by the way, it tends to be more locked in on one side than the other. Like the reputation system is more valuable for attracting the buyers, and yet the sellers are paying more of the fees, frequently, but it's like still valuable in terms of the loop. And then obviously there's negative incentives where, you can do things like saying, look, if we get a certain percentage or number of complaints that you are soliciting off platform transactions, we decrement you in search. We don't even need to kick you off the platform and so forth. So there's ways you can do both positive and negative. Obviously always a preference for the positive, but also from early stage, it's really not the big worry, right? If that's the thing in an early stage you're worrying about the wrong thing. Right.
Yeah, so speaking about Facebook, I mean, what role do you think they should or will play when it comes to classifieds, like second-hand
So let's see. As you know, they've had a failed classified.
He's a classifieds entrepreneur, just so you know.
They had a seriously failed effort. We at Greylock also got up front and close to that, not just from David Z's investment and my own investment in Facebook, but we were David was investing in Oodle, and Oodle and Craig, who's an awesome guy, basically went and back-ended it, and they just couldn't drive the demand. And the part of the challenge, so like for example, if Facebook came to me now and said, well, we're doing classifieds again, I'd tell them that they're being foolish if they asked me. And the reason is because you have to, on these networks, look at where the gravity is. Like, what's the gravity of what I'm doing, right? Does it fit with photo sharing? Does it fit, like games is actually something I think they should do, which is the reason I invested in Zynga, right? Because basically the investment in Zynga came down to very simply, Zuck doesn't understand games, doesn't understand why people waste their time with it, and doesn't like them. So he's not going to do them. And yet that's what the Facebook platform should be about, right? So therefore Zynga is an investment. And that kind of gave you the opportunity. The problem with classifieds is like, well, is this what I remember? And then you say, well, the social network, does it add value? Actually, in fact, most of the time when I want to sell something, I want to sell something to someone I don't know. I don't want the implicit guarantee. I sold it to Simon, hey, it's broken now. I broke a month later, really weird, right? And so like the whole social graph is actually a negative feature, not a positive feature. So I'm actually, in the design, now on entrepreneurship, like this is general pattern, like I'm skeptical of the general classifieds in Facebook. Now, it could be an entrepreneur, someone else goes, no, actually, I got the right thing that makes the social graph positive, or the fact that even though all the traffic goes to, funny pictures and other kinds of things, that people remember and go into it and will use it, and the right clever idea, I could go, oh yeah, I was right in general principle, that's very hard, but that idea trumps it. So it's not a never, 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 but it's highly unlikely. And another example of it is Facebook tried to launch a version of general search too. It couldn't work. And they said, oh, we got social graph, we got all this information about it. Well, when I come to Facebook, I'm not thinking search. I'm thinking fun pictures from my friends, right? So you tie into where the actual gravity and loops are. Now, you said, I have an idea for fun pictures and friends, and that leads to a new classifieds thing. Well, that might be something worth thinking about if it works. So anyway, angles.
You were mentioning this problem of two-sided marketplaces in supply and demand balance. Then, so what do you think of SaaS-enabled marketplaces to deal with this issue?
Sorry, which enabled market?
SaaS enabled. So
SaaS.
one of the
Yes,
things that we've discussed this afternoon. Raj talked about his marketplace network idea, and we had someone earlier who sort of said, I don't think SaaS and marketplaces easily fit together. You've got to start off by wanting to be a marketplace, and if you bolt on a workflow and free SaaS product, great, but it's rare that something starts as SaaS and then upgrades its business model to marketplace over time. So I think that's the genesis of the question. Okay. And just to put it in context, this chap is is at the early stages of business, not too far away from Convoy
Oh,
in this part of the world. So that's the context of his question.
Yes. So I think marketplaces are super valuable, but also super hard. So I think if you're doing a marketplace, that's what you're doing. And you focus on the key things in the marketplace, the liquidity of it, the buyers and sellers in the demand, the dashboards that specifically teach you about what to do there, because it's a lot, like working on demand for a while, then you're working on supply for a while, you're working on liquidity, you're looking on transactional conversion, you're doing all these kinds of things. And if you happen to have some SaaS ready to hand that helps you with that, great, and then fine. But it all comes back from that marketplace liquidity. If you say, I'm going to do a whole bunch of SaaS that's going to enable it, unless it directly enables those specific problems, it's a diversion of focus. And literally 99% of marketplaces end in smoking craters, right? So it's like, do not divert from that focus. And only work back to SaaS and workflow and other kinds of things in as much as they help you very specifically within marketplace, right? And to the minimum to which they do that. Now, you may add into them over time, like once you really begin to get your theory of critical mass and liquidity and transactional volume and assets building going, then you might go, oh, the real way to amplify this is to change this part of the workflow for the buyer, for the seller, to integrate into something that's a B2B concern, like how a shipper might be, concerned with something, and that may be a viable way of doing that. But I wouldn't. Marketplaces are so hard that literally I would make all of your priorities stem exactly from the marketplace, and literally only do the SaaS stuff if that's the next step that I'm trying to solve in the marketplace.
Zenius.
Yeah, hi. So I've seen recently that you've launched a marketplace in LinkedIn for turning LinkedIn into somewhat of a marketplace. What's the
Launching a marketplace on top of.
on top of?
Yes.
I selfishly asked for a single marketplace
Yeah.
for people per hour. But
Oh, yeah.
I'd love to know what the big picture is there.
So I've had a theory that that actually networks can launch marketplaces. It actually hasn't happened yet. ProFinder, we're seeing how it works, and so. And thus far, by the way, I can't say anything about the results. Public companies and everything else, but we're happy with them. And the theory is as you're solving this buy-sell demand, if you actually have channels by which you can naturally promote to them, and actually do the natural connections and solve the how do you get enough supply? Can you get enough supply to wait for the buy-side demand? Can you generate the buy-side demand the right way? That's one of the central questions on networks for essentially can you launch the marketplaces, which is essentially 80% of what we're really doing beyond the minimum to start the cycle going. Then my theory is that you can, in fact, you can launch marketplaces. Now, we couldn't launch a car marketplace, right? We don't have the network for that. But, it's a marketplace for accountants and lawyers and graphic designers and other kinds of folks that we actually have a very wide set to do. And so, and it's a venture bet, so I can't guarantee success, but I think it's possible. And it was interesting, my partner Simon Hoffman, who built eBay Autos, who's our guy who focuses entirely on marketplaces, he and I had about a 3 months conversation where he was kind of going, okay, you're nuts, no, my earlier answer, you have to focus entirely on the marketplace, a network for marketplace won't work, etc. And now actually I think he's intrigued and thinks that it might work. But those, and the reason to do it is kind of obviously, like, we're trying to be about the economic potential, the major economic potential for every member of LinkedIn. Some people, don't do I'm looking for a job, right? Or I need a little bit of work on the side, even if I have a job in a certain way. And well, how do we provide that? So this is our experiment with it.
So thank you, Reid, for coming. You're going to stay for drinks. And thank you, everyone. I know it's a very significant contribution of time for all of you to devote, the best part of a day, in many cases, to travel to London for this. We're very grateful as Mosaic and Mike and Toby, myself, that you made that investment. There's many of you in the room that we're already in business with in one way, shape or form. And the reason the rest of you are here is that we'd like at some point to be in business with you too.
Yeah,
So
let me add something.
yeah.
Part of the reason I'm here is because if I have my first choice partner in Europe for early stage deals, it's these guys. Right. So.
That's very kind. But on that, I don't think I'll top that. So on that.